Our program today is going to be built around 4 questions, basically about redistricting. Why do we do it every decade? How it used to work in Virginia, how we can expect the new system to work, and will there be enough time this year to draw the House districts for the November elections? I'm sad to report we've had a last minute change to our panel. Former Senator Rosalind Dance, unfortunately, has a family situation that she needs to attend to and will not be here. But our other 2 panelists are, and I'm pleased to introduce them. John Watkins was a member of the House from 1982 to 1988 and later served in the Senate from 1998 to 2016. He has the distinction and his long career in the General Assembly have survived or lived through 4 redistricting cycles. He brings that wealth of understanding to the panel. Welcome, John.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here.
And then our second panelist is Bob Holsworth, who has been a long time political commentator in Virginia. And I have to say, you may not know that Bob housed VPAP in our first couple of years at VCU at the School of Politics. We couldn't have gotten started without his support. And one thing that Bob, in addition to his encyclopedic knowledge of Virginia politics, brings to this is some of you may remember in 2011 when Governor McDonnell set up a bipartisan panel to look at alternatives for redistricting. He appointed Bob Holsworth, and Bob served as that panel. So Bob, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Great to be with you, David.
Well, let's start out just with the big question. We have this new process, and we're going to be getting into that in our session. My question, and before we get started, we're going to be joined by our third panelist, a last-minute replacement. Incredible for you to be here, Bobby. This is Bobby Vassar, a former aide to Delegate Bobby Scott. He's a member of the One Virginia 2021 board, which is the group that advocated for redistricting reform, and he is going to ably fill the shoes of Senator Dance. Bobby, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And I just have to warn you that at this point, you'll probably get exactly what you pay for with this short notice, but I'm happy to help any way that I can. And just want to say hello to my great friend, Bob Holsworth.
Great to see you, Bob.
Hey.
Well, thank you so much. So you wing it, you'll do great. So I wanted to get started first with a question for everybody, and you can think about this. Bobby, I'll call on you last. What will success look like at the end of this process this year and for Virginia, this new process we have? And I'll start, Senator Watkins, with you. What will success look like to you?
I think success to me would look like an evenly divided vote that was shared by Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate. I don't think we're going to get, 100% vote to pass redistricting as it comes out of the commission. But if we can get a bipartisan vote, then I do think that is success, and it will give us the impetus to refine what we're doing and how we do it in the years ahead.
Okay, great, Senator. Thank you. Bob, what would success look like to you?
I think success will be, on a number of levels, but I think the most important success is that if they can come to some agreement that solves the egregious problems that we've had in previous redistricting, which I think is really what spurred in so many ways the reform movement, was that, this was simply not working at all in Virginia. What was happening was really unfair. And so I think that if at the end of the day, there's more widespread agreement that we've, prevented the harms that we previously had, that's probably success. there's other ideas that people have when they think about redistricting, that it's going to, generate competitive elections across the Commonwealth. They're going to generate more candidates running for office. I think that might be a further reach. So from my perspective, what this amendment may achieve, and what I hope it achieves, is really preventing the really egregious problems we had, and maybe in some ways rebuilding a little bit of citizen trust in the governmental process, something that has eroded fairly significantly over the last couple of decades.
Right, thank you. Bobby, who your name is now correctly
Yes.
identified in your
Thanks.
label. What would success look like to you, Bobby?
Well, certainly I agree with the substance and merit of what both John and Bob said, but I also think appearance is important. And so I would like the result they describe to be reflected through a diverse commission from both a geographical and a demographical perspective to give more confidence of the public in the results. Certainly, we have that reflected, I believe, in the legislative representatives there. So I'm hoping the citizens representatives will also reflect that. And of course, I agree particularly with John's point that it would be useful to have a bipartisan result of a plan that people can have confidence in. We're starting not exactly from scratch. We had a court directed plan that is reasonably fair under the circumstances as a starting point, but then I think it can certainly be improved upon in terms of some of the guidelines that the law will require under the new framework and new scheme. And so I just hope that we have a result that is sanctioned by the approved by the commission and sanctioned by the legislature. We have a fail-safe process, and certainly have confidence in that if we have to go there, but I hope that we can have it through a normal fully sanctioned process with the commission and the legislature.
Thank you. And before we get started, we have gotten some questions beforehand, and some of them, I think we want to dispel at least one misunderstanding. I think there's some expectation that in Virginia, we're now going to have nonpartisan redistricting. And Bob, can you take that question for a minute and just, the title of the seminar is Bipartisan Redistricting, and that is really what we're looking at in terms of the new scheme that we have.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that, actually, to understand A, what this is about, and B, what the likely outcomes is going to be as well. But bipartisan redistricting really means that both parties are involved. And I think in terms of the plan, they're supposed to be relatively balanced at every level. So if you take a look at our plan, it requires 8 legislators are going to be members of the commission, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. There are going to be 8 citizen members. And I think this is where the misconception sometimes arises, that people think that the 8 citizen members are going to be independent members entirely. But I think we have to understand that the way the commission operates, even though the citizen members are ultimately picked by a panel, I think, of retired judges, what happens is that the initial culling of them, you have the application process, and then the parties cull the members, basically, and they present a pool of citizen members from which the judges will pick essentially, I think, basically equal numbers of Democrat and Republican sort of oriented citizen members. And this is different than you might see in some other states in which, for example, there would be no elected officials who are members, or in other states where you have party registration, and there's a requirement that independent citizens be selected. And then some other states have actually had an equal number of partisans, but have put forward what they call an independent chair. That usually turns out to be quite the disaster, because ultimately that independent chair breaks a tie and nobody's happy with what happened. But essentially, our process involves partisans at every point. And the idea behind, I think, the process is to balance the partisanship. And that's a little different from requiring that there be no elected officials who are members, or a requirement that there actually be people who are independent and that they have an equal voice, you might say, in reaching the decision. So I think it's essential for everyone to kind of understand that Virginia has moved in a bipartisan direction and not what you might call an independent commission direction.
Okay, that's very helpful, Bob. Thank you for helping us frame this discussion. And so I'm going to do a quick, I'm going to show some slides in a second of kind of why we have to go through this process every 10 years. And that is population shifts drive this. And that because every district in there's 40 in the state Senate, 100 in the House, 11 congressional districts in Virginia, each has to have roughly the same population. So if you have a situation that over time, in a decade, it can be a long time in demographics, you have areas that are growing fast, where the current maybe Senate districts are overpopulated, and you have other areas that are growing not as fast, or perhaps even losing population, they're underpopulated. So this is a reapportionment. Every 10 years, you have to step up and figure out, how do we make each district have roughly the same number of people? And so if we can see the first set of slides here, these are some slides we put up before on VPAP showing where the demographic trends, and these are well established, been going on for the last 4 or 5 decades, where the southern part of the state, and particularly in Southwest, is losing population, and the Northern Virginia is gaining population, particularly recently in Loudoun County and Prince William County. So this is 1991, and this is the House redistricting, and this is the shift of seats, and you can see the seats went from Southwest to the eastern part of the state, and mainly the northern part of the state. On the next slide, we'll show what happened in 2001. Again, this is when the Republicans first took control. Hampton Roads has some underpopulated districts. I think the speaker at the time, Tom Moss, liked to have it that way. And those were quickly shifted up to the north. Southwest, again, lost 2 seats. And then the last redistricting in 2011, again, 3 seats from Hampton Roads. And we think of Hampton Roads as part of the fast growing urban crescent in Virginia. But actually, the population has kind of stalled in Hampton Roads for several decades. And so this is the last slide is a slide of the Senate districts from a few years ago. These are voter registration trends, the blue being areas that have not kept up with the state, and the orange being, the darker orange being the ones that are growing fast. So you can see this is, again, likely to be the trend of just is going to have to happen. When I was a reporter at the Roanoke Times in the 90s, there was a group of Democratic senators that started with Frank Nolan up in Augusta County and went all the way to the end of the state. And they called themselves the Western 8. They were all Democrats at the time. And now there's 6 seats in that area. And there soon may be 5. These are the trends that are driving the need to redraw the districts. And we can go back and then we go back to the panel. So then the question is, how do you draw the lines? And that's what this is all about. And Senator Watkins, I'd like to turn this over to you. And you saw this happen in 81 when you first ran, 91, 2001, 2011. You were there and you saw it. Can you talk to us about how it used to work and some of the reasons why this momentum to pass this referendum was successful?
Thank you, David. Well, I came in, I was originally elected in 81, and they had just performed a redistricting at that time. And the courts threw the redistricting out of the House of Delegates because they included multi-member districts, some in Central Virginia, some in Hampton Roads primarily. And so after being elected, the courts informed all of us, all 100 of us, that we were elected for only 1 year, not 2 years as originally thought. And so when we came back in, when we joined, then we had to go in and have a special session after the first session and go through the redistricting again to meet the criteria that the courts put on us, and primarily doing away with multi-member districts. And that was how it all started. But that's also how it involved myself, because I was one of the people that was in one of those multi-member districts. And that sorting out changed the alignment of the representation in places like Chesterfield County and Colonial Heights, Powhatan counties. So it was impactful to me and impactful to the people that ran with me and had originally won in 1981. From there, the process really took on a different view, if you would. We were beginning to not get so much technology in the 90-91, but it was a lot of influence with regard to local elected officials and the requirement almost that if you were going to run for political office in the House or the Senate or in Congress, you had to have the connections, if you would, with the people in elected office in the jurisdictions that you were going to represent. And you depended on those people and those jurisdictions to help you put together what in your mind and what in their mind would be the best district for you to represent. And then you tried to impose that and use that information to redraw the lines. Now, there was a lot of information available in terms of who won what elections when that you could use to help set a plan in place. And that's how we got through 90-91.
If I can,
Sure.
John, if I can just interrupt, I want to ask you about that. I find it, I understand there used to be they called it a war room.
Yeah.
Second floor and legislative services. And at that time, you just had giant maps, right? And you were drawing on them. And can you describe that process?
Well, they took up a good piece of, of office space up there when the war rooms were founded, because at first it was just one war room. And then people realized that there were going to be Democratic leanings and there were going to be Republican leanings. And so they started developing separate war rooms. And then it became a matter of having people from legislative services who worked with one group or the other and tried to keep some balance with what was going on. But it became more and more partisan as you started drawing the maps. And, it was very difficult to get consistent agreement, if you would, on the makeup of those maps. And the other piece of it that became interesting was the population shifts that were taking place, particularly in Northern Virginia, and at the time, even in Hampton Roads. They could alter elections within that 10-year time frame just from the growth that was taking place in those jurisdictions. When I started in the legislature, Fairfax County was 500,000 people, 500,000. We thought that was just unbelievable. And it's now over 1.5 million. It's 3 times what it was 30 years ago, 40, almost 40 years ago now. But the outlying areas in Loudoun and Prince William are also changing quickly, and they change how elections go. But moving on, into 2000 and more particularly into 2011, technology became more prominent in how the redistricting was done. At one point, I can remember that the technology, allowed you to understand where everybody lived that was in elected office in those particular districts. And, that became a questionable piece of knowledge because everybody was trying to protect themselves rather than protect the people they were representing. And that is where the conflict started to really reach a peak with regard to how redistricting really should be done. And in 2011, it became even more refined. And the worst thing was that the people that understood the technology and the members that could utilize the technology would come in with amendments at the last minute to maps that had been generally agreed to on the Privileges and Elections Committee and the respective bodies. They would come on the floor and they would have these technical amendments coming in that would adjust district lines in certain parts of Virginia. And I saw some people who had, a seat or had a residence in a certain district get completely shifted out of what they thought was the district they were running in or the one that they had been running in. So that infuriated some people. It also made it difficult to explain to the citizens why that had happened. And the use of the technology became so acute and so refined that you could do amendments literally overnight that could have huge impacts on the representation that was taking place in the House and the Senate and in Congress.
All right, that's really helpful. Thank you, Senator. And Bobby,
Sure.
I know, I'll turn to Bobby. I know when you worked for Congressman Scott, was there a similar war room up in Congress as the congressional members put together maps?
Well, of course, they work with the legislature because that's who puts it together for the congressional districts as well as the state districts. And yes, that's always been there. And it's not that they're evil people trying to do bad things. They're reasonable people doing human things. And I think that was a part of the difficulty with the way it's has been structured. People have to be vested in the way the districts are drawn because they have to run in them. They have people that they represent. And to say that you're going to put yourself into that way to represent a constituency and to not care about where the lines are drawn or who's there and whether you have some of the same people this term as you did last term to try to run to represent. I mean, that's the difficulty. I hope what this process we have now has done is taken the natural motive out of the process in terms of focusing on how it impacts legislators, and now to have the focus on how it impacts citizens and the way citizens relate to districts, town and city boundaries, communities of interest, and other factors that citizens care more about that don't have as much impact on legislators looking at what, one, it takes for them to be more likely reelected, and two, to have their party in control. So those things won't evaporate because we still have a bipartisan, which I think is crucial, as the senator was saying, to this process being more fair all around. But there's also, in addition to Bob's point about how it's equally bipartisan, there was a lot of scrupulous attention given to ensuring that the citizen representatives are not just politicians. They're not anybody's stand-in. Some of the restrictions are really tough. If you had a son or a parent who was in a legislative position 20 years ago that you no longer have any connection with, that's a disqualifier if you read the rules technically. So those kinds of things, I think, will probably need to be looked at as we go forward. But there is a lot of attention to make sure that there are other considerations other than how this impacts politicians. And I think that's the whole idea, to turn it around to say, let's make sure the process represents citizens' interests in line drawing rather than politicians' interests.
Well, that's very interesting. Next question, I'm gonna turn this over to Bob Holsworth real quick. And that is, Bobby Vassar mentioned human nature, right? And it seems like if you are a human being and you have the ability to influence how your district is drawn, and if it's drawn in a way so that you can go to that beach weekend, a couple weeks in the summer with your family like you always do, or it's drawn in such a way that you have such a difficult race that you have to spend the whole summer dialing for dollars and going door to door. I mean, we're all human, right? Who would not want the first choice and the second choice? Bob, how do you think it's going to work where the thing that's most important to a lot of legislators, and that is, how does it affect me? How do you include legislators but take that consideration out?
Well, I think that's in some ways the challenge. So let me try to talk first about what I think works pretty easily in this new system, and then what's the challenge, to kind of answer your question. I think what will work best is some of the points that Senator Watkins and Bobby Vassar just made, and that is, if we draw the lines that are better, we're going to give citizens a better chance to understand who their legislators are. One of the things that I was really struck by when we did the independent commission and went around the state holding sort of public forums was that people, and even legislators, again and again told us they had difficulty understanding the nature of the district, who was their legislator. And I think what you see in Virginia, under the way this system has morphed over the years, is that people understand who their local legislators are, their board of supervisor members, their city council members, far better than they even know who their elected representative is in the General Assembly. And maybe I think this system could actually help that. If you have fewer people going into, let us say, a precinct during an election, and having people who live 2 blocks away voting for different legislators on that front. So I think that's going to work pretty well, and I'm optimistic about that. I think the challenge, of course, is what happens when you have 8 legislators as part of the commission and have the legislators culling some of the other members. So my thinking here, again, is that what you're likely to have as a result is that you're going to prevent the most egregious kind of redistricting that we've had over the past 20 or 30 years, some of which have really worked to the benefit of the party, certainly the Republicans in 2001, 2011. The Democrats, after 1991, you might recall, lost 8 Senate seats after a redistricting they controlled because of this sort of confluence of trying to understand what emphasis they should put on minority representation, what the cutoff should be, what they were required to do by the courts, and what some suburban white Democrats were trying to do to save their seats. They actually lost seats in that election. But my sense is that to prevent what you spoke about, you would have to have additional rules, such as John and Bobby mentioned, that would be related to, would the commission know where people live on that front? And so my sense is what you're likely to come up with here is a bipartisan solution, but I think that bipartisan solution will still in many ways help to protect a lot of incumbents in this sense, because if they know where they live, if they know what the existing districts are, it doesn't mean you're going to have dramatic change. I think they'll be more compact, more contiguous, but I don't necessarily believe they're going to be far more competitive to the point that the legislators will be signing their own exit warrant, you might say.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to show another slide here to the point of in 2011, the House Republicans controlled the process. They had a Republican governor and Bob McDonnell, and they put through a plan that for a decade, the Democrats complained, put them at a huge disadvantage. But if you look at who voted for this plan, most Democrats voted for the plan that was going to disadvantage their party as a whole, but it would advantage them. This kind of gets this idea of the party of incumbency is a very powerful force in redistricting. And you can see that the Democrats who got more friendly districts in this process were far and away ready to support it, while those who were disadvantaged were much less likely to vote for it. So this idea of self-interest, how do you deal with it and take that out? It's a human condition, and as long as the legislators at the table, to Bob's point, Bob was saying that he thought a lot of incumbents would find themselves protected in this plan. Bobby or Senator Watkins, Bobby Vassar or Senator Watkins, do you agree with that position? And we can take the slides down now.
I tend to agree. It's going to really amount to the ability of the leadership in the respective houses to control, if you would, their party, or if they're Democrats, the Democrat caucus, and if they're Republicans, the Republican caucus. And I'm not sure that that's entirely beneficial to the prospect of the success of a bipartisan redistricting. I've seen it work in both directions with regard to additional seats that would make it more competitive for one caucus to remain in power, if you would. And they summarily voted against what would have been or could have been an improvement in terms of the representation.
I certainly agree with the senator's points. There are some issues going forward. I just hope that we'll look at this as an evolutionary process, that we don't expect nirvana from the beginning, moving forward. There are going to be some growing pains. There are going to be some adjustments. I would expect that the legislators on the commission will have a mind toward and view toward representing not only the interests of their constituents and the citizens as a whole, but they'll also still be aligned with their parties. And so they're going to have to come away with something that they can feel is fair in terms of that process. We see it at play when there are big issues that the parties have to come to grip with and come up with some solution that where nobody gets all of what they want. It's not going to necessarily be about control anymore. That my side's got to win and yours got to lose. But I'm hoping that bipartisan requirement with the citizens joining in will bring about solutions that are viewed as fair to both sides from a political perspective, as well as from a standpoint of what should citizens expect from the process. But it's not going to be great in all respects from the beginning. I think it has to be an evolutionary process. I freely concede that I sought initially to have an all citizens panel. Not that that would eliminate politics or anything, but it would get away some of the perception that this is still only about politics. But regardless of what you have, you're talking about the lives of individuals who put themselves out there to do a service to the public, and we can't just discard that as having no meaning. I mean, it does have meaning, and so we've got to reflect fairness. And I think that will be a big part of the process of not as much who's in control, but what's fair. And I've tried to suggest to Democrats, as I've worked for this amendment, who were critical of that effort, that I feel confident that Democrats will do fine in a fair district and fair process if that's what we have. I'm just not concerned with that. If you look at 2017, Democrats almost won majority, came down to a hat draw in completely Republican drawn districts. And then when the courts came in and drew the districts that they did run in 2019, which were considered reasonably or relatively fair, they did win the majority. So I feel if Democrats can go with a fair shake without having to worry about whether they have control, I think Democrats will be okay. And I hope that Republicans feel the same way, that then it'll be a focus on who the citizens believe best represents their interests from the standpoint of who's running in a fair district.
Okay. Let's get to the third question, and how will this new system work? And right now we're in the process of still appointing the citizen members, or that hasn't happened yet. So there's the commission, just to review, it's going to have 16 members, 8 legislators, 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. The citizens will have to be chosen based on the amendment says, or it's the enabling legislation, I'm sorry which one, but there is a rule in effect that the citizens have to reflect the racial, ethnic, and geographic and gender diversity of Virginia. So there's been, right now, as of Friday, there was 214 people have applied. VPAP has obtained those applications. I want to show those to you real quickly. The demographics, there's been a lot of on social media concern about this, but it doesn't mean just because the demographics are weighted one way in applications doesn't mean the finalists. The requirement is that the finalists have to meet this racial, ethnic, geographic, and gender balance. So you can see so far the men have been the most of the applicants. The next, just roll through these real quick. Race is, white is probably around 60% or more. Hispanic, been very few Hispanic applicants so far. The age has skewed older, and that's, this is a board and commission. It's not a job. It's not a full-time job or part-time job. And members are going to have to be kind of ready to drop everything when a meeting is called. And it's unfortunately, or unfortunately, it's just a matter of fact. If you don't work for a living, or you're in a job that you're self-employed and have a really understanding boss, you're probably going to see more older people have that flexibility and time. And then people self-identify their party. And you can see this is what the distribution is. Almost as many, the highest group is Democrats, but not the people who say they have no party is right up there. And I'm sure when these applications, the finalists are, the names are, people are going to be looking at their donation history and their voting history to find out if somebody who says they have no party, if there is any kind of evidence or suggestions of what their lean might be. And then, so finally, the income. Again, there's been a lot of, on social media, when we posted these, a lot of concern about this is wealthy people. And I don't know if this is tied to generational. The older people tend to have greater wealth or income. But anyway, so it's skewing higher there. And then finally by region, which is interesting, as of Friday, Southwest Virginia was still waiting for its first applicant.
Wow.
And
Wow.
pretty amazing, but the rest seems what you might expect. I thought it was kind of high actually for the Roanoke. There's the way they set it up, there's a district that goes from Roanoke to, or maybe Blacksburg to Lynchburg had unusually high number out there, but that's the distribution. So that's just the applicants. So we'll go away from the visuals for a second. And so as Bob said, I think maybe others have said that these applicant pool, that there's a panel of 5 retired judges. 4 of them were picked by legislators, and then the 5th was picked by the courts. And so they will select the 8 members. And as they don't, let's say there's 400 people apply in the end, they're not just going to sit down with that list of 400. They're going to provide that list to the legislature and specifically to each caucus. So the House Republicans will provide a list of at least 16 names. The House Democrats will provide a similar list, and same in the Senate. And they'll pick 2 from each list. So it's as Bob's point earlier, these are not a completely blind independent draw. These are 2 people that were screened and endorsed, as you were, by the House Republicans, and 2 similar by the House Democrats, and so forth. So that's the way the panel is set up. It's set up to be evenly. It's basically 8 citizen members, and 4 were endorsed, if I can use that term, by the Republicans, and 4 were endorsed by the Democrats. It'll be interesting to see if some people show up on both lists that might be put forward by either party. So that is going to be the commission. So the next step for us is really, well, first of all, I'll stop and see if any of the panel have any thoughts on that. How do you think? Bobby Vassar mentioned there's a lot of disqualifiers. There was legislation passed in November that basically they didn't want just to have the legislators and their aides being the citizens. They wanted to make this more, so they disqualified anybody who's held a partisan elected office, who's been an officer in a political party, who's worked as an employee in a campaign, has worked for Congress or the General Assembly, or a spouse or sibling of anybody like that. Is that, Bobby, you mentioned that earlier, is that, that takes away a lot of people who actually know about the process, right?
It does.
You lose somebody's experience, but the gain is, I suppose, you're trying to find people who aren't just tied that closely to politics.
Yeah, exactly. And we have this every day. I mean, we have jurors who come in and make life and death decisions in court settings, and certainly others that are very important in the civil side and other issues. And so citizen perspective that's not necessarily through a political lens is an important ingredient. We have citizens boards for practically every agency in the state. And so that's a very sacred part of our system of government in Virginia. And this is designed to have that same reflection, not someone's surrogate, a politician's surrogates to come in the process. So I'm hopeful for that. I hope that most of those who applied do meet the criteria, so that the legislators will have a wholesome list to select from. And I hope that rather than focus on parochial interests, making sure that you have a strong partisan in the citizen side of the ledger from your 16 as one of the individual leaders who will select 16, from which the judges will select from a list totally of 64, that they'll see the need to follow the guidelines of diversity of geographical as well as demographic considerations across the state. And I think that will assist the judges greatly in their ability to ensure that when they go to the list, they can then select people from each of the leaders' lists that also are reflective of those interests from around the state. And so that's my hope for this process. But once we do get citizens, again, I don't have the concerns that some have that, these are going to be citizens that are just going to be walked over by legislators who are stronger or, more politics oriented. As you say, we're going to have, as the senator indicated, we're going to have great tools in terms of the technology there. And so these citizens are going to be able to see plainly what different scenarios mean in terms of running maps across the state, and they'll be one of the big pluses of this new process is rather than backroom deals, it's going to be totally open to the public. So the public is going to see what considerations are being made, what's being put forth, what the rationales are, and so I'm very hopeful that we will have a good citizen panel, but it'll certainly be incumbent upon legislative leaders who select the 16 citizens to make sure that there's a diverse grouping from each one of them. You're on mute, David.
There you go. Thank you. I'm going to open this up to a few questions here, and anybody jump in and answer. There's been some questions about, and this was a criticism of many Democrats who said that if the legislature if the commission itself can't draw maps, or the legislature can't approve them after a couple of tries, the authority falls to the state Supreme Court to draw the maps. And there was concern that because of many appointments by Republicans, that is a Republican-leaning body and might end up with a Republican gerrymander at the end. What safeguards are in place to ensure that doesn't happen?
I think the fact that they have a couple of bites at that apple is probably the only assurance that you have. I hope that it doesn't go to the courts, but we've had the courts inject themselves into redistricting cases on numerous occasions already. So it's not like it's something that won't or can't happen. I hope that we can come to enough of a settlement on a bipartisan plan that we don't have to go there.
Yeah, David, my sense is that there is enabling legislation about the kind of special masters the court would appoint that suggests that they come from nominees of the party, that they have to appoint two who would work together. I would agree with Senator Watkins that if that happens, that would really mitigate, I think, the success of the process. If we wind up simply going to the courts once again for an answer, it basically says, I think, that the process didn't work the way we really wanted it to work. I do believe that at the end of the day, the process is set up in such a way that the easiest agreement is incumbent protection. And we're going to have to see whether or not this process can reach a bipartisan solution that goes beyond that. I think that the challenge may well come about when we think about how to organize those new districts that you mentioned are going to have to come about because of the demographic change in the state. And then finally, I would just add one other practical point, is that the time process is very constrained for doing this. And secondly, that could become even more challenging if the COVID virus is coursing through Virginia at the same level when this has to be done a month or two down the road than it is now, because then it's going to make it more difficult for this process to go on in the kind of transparent way that it's gone on to date. I think that one of the great things so far has been the transparency, just in terms of the citizen application that you've put forward and the like. But that could become a practical challenge as well going forward. I'm a little less worried about what would happen with the Supreme Court as I am is that if we had to actually go to them, it would really tell us that we have voted for a process that really ultimately didn't work, and that would be a big problem.
Let me just say quickly, David, that I agree, of course, with both John and Bob's points. And I would want to point out on your indication of the concern of Democrats that should it have to go to the courts, I am not worried about that aspect of it. I would remind my Democratic friends that we have a majority of the House members, as well the U.S. House members, in terms of the redrawing of congressional districts, and we have a majority in both the Senate and the House of Delegates as a result of court magistrate drawn districts. So for Democrats to say that that process is somehow negative or unfair to them just doesn't meet with what the experience has been.
Well, I'll point out, I think Bob noted that, just so we're really clear on this process, the General Assembly enacted enabling legislation as part of the budget last month. And it says that if it goes to the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court has to choose one expert chosen by the Democrats and one expert chosen by the Republicans. And those two experts have to come up with a map. So it's hard to imagine a situation if those experts coming back with a compromise map that any court would seek to redraw it to change the partisan equation for either side. So I think that's that safeguard that's built in. We're going to get, in a minute, we're going to get to the compressed time schedule that Bob Holsworth mentioned. There's a question here from Chris Pace, who asked about competitiveness. And it speaks to the expectation, perhaps, that this process might result in more competitive House races or Senate races or congressional races. Is that a legitimate expectation from this process?
You know, David, I think that's the best you can expect is sort of a modest increase in competitiveness. First, most people in political science, my field, believe that what's happened over the years is that there is a growing connection between sort of your cultural and residential affinities and your political affinities. So in the far Southwest Virginia, you can redraw the lines 30 different ways. I don't know it's going to be more competitive if, Republicans are getting 75 and 80% of the vote. Eastern Northern Virginia, I think you would have, the same issue on the Democratic side. So there's a sorting out that goes by residents that is not going to make things more competitive. If you really wanted to make everything more competitive, you'd have to gerrymander. You'd have to draw the districts in kind of really odd, crazy ways that wouldn't impact contiguousness and compactness and things like that. On the other hand, what we have seen in some other states that have gone to this is that if you've had a system that has really been overbearing on one side or another, what you tend to get is somewhat more competitive elections. So here's the situation. If in Virginia we were still in the situation where Republicans had 64 seats and the Democrats had, 36 seats in the House, at the end of the day, you're going to find far more competition come about through any kind of fair maps, because that doesn't reflect right now at all sort of the demographic or political characteristics of Virginia. But in the situation that we have now in Virginia, where the Senate is, 21-19, the House 55-45, I think you might have slightly more competitiveness, but I don't think at the end of the day, you're going to have sort of this open, free-for-all competitiveness that goes across the Commonwealth.
And that is, and the criteria drawn up that the commission will have to follow does competitive races is not one of the criteria. Just point that out. There's another question here. This was prompted VPAP. We put out information on Twitter over the weekend, noting that when the legislature decided, how that these members of the commission will be compensated, they referred to a section of the code that applies to most volunteer boards and commissions, and that's a $50 a day, fee, which is maybe what you might get if you served on jury duty. We noted that the legislative daily rate is, at least in the Senate, is $300 a day, and so you'll have a commission where you have the legislators are paid, 5 times more. Or my math is right, 6 times more than the legislators, the citizens who are sitting there. Do you think this is an issue that the legislature or the commission should address? Is it a fair question?
David, I definitely think that should be addressed, because otherwise it's going to affect those people who are willing to serve. Even if they put their applications in and they find out that half of the commission is going to be paid at a rate much, much higher than they are, they might just say, no, thank you. And I couldn't blame them. I think that the House and Senate have the opportunity to make an adjustment there. And we're not talking about huge dollars, because it's 8 people, and they're serving for a brief period of time in consideration of what the legislators and all are serving. So they have the ability to do it. I just hope they will.
Yeah, I do too. The appearance to me is a main issue. Already the perception that citizens are going to be, overwhelmed by legislative members who are so much more knowledgeable about the process and have so much more stake in it. And so that only feeds into that perception if you have that kind of inequity in service, which is certainly I view it as equal service from all the members. And, this will involve a citizen chair. So you got your chairman making less than some of the members for sitting there. Those kinds of perceptions just don't go well. So I hope certainly that kind of thing is adjusted to ensure that all the members are recognized equally for their work.
Another question that has come up is Travis Pearson asked this question, and that is, it's interesting that the commission has created this idea of citizen involvement, and they put out requests for applications without providing any sense of how much time would be involved, when they might need to be available on call. It's been very confusing to people. We've seen a lot of questions about this online. Senator Watkins, or Bobby, anybody, what would you tell people they might expect in terms of their time commitment here?
I think it's going to be significant once they get the census data. And that's, when the census data arrives is going to set a lot of timelines for everybody involved. But certainly they have, even if they get a map, they are certain requirements at the federal level that must be met, and they're going to take time to be met as well. So I think it's going to be probably 60 to 90 days of fairly intense time on everybody's part that's on that commission.
Yeah, let me echo and reinforce what Senator Watkins just said. Once those census data come in, if you're taking this seriously, it's not a 4 or 5 hour a week job. And let me just say that, you know, it is really extensive because the commission is going to have to come up with certain kinds of rules and criteria that legislative services and their experts will put before them. For example, if you're, when we're looking at congressional representation, the courts have been pretty adamant that population ratios over the district have to be almost absolutely equal. When you talk about the General Assembly, there's a little more variance. Are you going to make it 0.5%, 1%, 2%? All of these kind of questions arise when you look at this. Secondly, there are really 3 different maps here you're talking about. You're talking about a congressional map, you're talking about a House of Delegates map, you're talking about Senate maps. And there are various ways of doing this. When we had, in 2011, we didn't have support from legislative services, but we did have some outside experts, and we had all of the student groups that were involved in the student competition feeding maps into us. Some of those maps were just really superb, drawn in many instances by remarkable undergraduates, graduate students, and law students. So if you take this seriously and take this responsibility seriously, it is really going to require a very significant commitment of time by every individual who's involved with this commission in order to educate yourself about the rules, to understand the requirements, let us say, of the Voting Rights Act and minority participation and minority inclusion, and to try to ensure that you have a set of maps presented to you that really give you options rather than just being presented with a single map and asked to go up or down on it. So anybody who's going to be involved, it's going to be an experience of their lifetime. It's going to be a wonderful experience, I think, in a lot of ways, but it is not going to be something that's incidental in terms of time.
Let me quickly apologize. My internet went out, so I missed and had to connect by my phone. So I missed the last discussion.
Anyway, it was, the question was about how much time it would require. And I think we're ready to move on to the next question. That's right. The 4th big question of this session. And we have about 20 minutes left. And that is, will there be time? Will there be time to draw the maps in time for the House elections this fall? And so I'm just going to, of course, the census is done every 10 years. And then there's only 2 states, Virginia and New Jersey, that have elections coming up next year. So for most states, they have, when the census data comes out in early 2021, they have a year or so before they can really start to draw their maps for their 2022 elections. Virginia doesn't have the luxury of time. It's always been a compressed process, and the census knows this. And in the past, they've always provided Virginia and New Jersey their data early. I believe in 2010 it came out the 2nd week of February. So that gives everyone time to draw the maps. We're told the indications are early right now that the census is not going to do that. They've been under extremely amount of pressure from COVID. They've been under political pressure on their timeline. And they've said that this kind of stopping and getting a set of data for one state and other states takes longer, and that they're just going to, they may, although they haven't made a final decision, give all the states the data at the same time, which will be April the 1st. So that would create a very, very, very difficult situation for Virginia. Just to get the process started. Just so you understand, the State Board of Elections has put out a preliminary timeline of what would work to hold when would the Board of Elections need to get the maps in time to hold elections in November. And that would mean moving the House primaries to late August. They've said they need the maps by April the 2nd. And that is if you back off, say, I think August 24th would be the primaries, 45 days of early voting. And then they say another 99 days for the administrative side of this. And you have to keep in mind that when the maps are drawn, once the maps are redrawn, millions of voters have changed districts, either their House district or Senate district, congressional, or all three. And it's incumbent upon the local registrars to update the voter record. So there has to be this process by which the localities have to have time to make these changes. Meanwhile, local governments are having to change their districts to perhaps their board of supervisors, magisterial districts, or their city council districts. And so all that time has to happen there. So the question is, what would give if that were the case? And of course, they could shorten the amount of time for early elections and maybe tell the localities you're going to have to, instead of 99 days, we're going to give you 60 days. But it's going to be tight. And I'm going to show another slide here that we've put up on our website that shows kind of the timeline of how long it could take the General Assembly to pass the maps. It could take as many as 81 days. The clock would start when the state receives the census data. And of course, you need this data to know exactly where the people are to draw the lines. The amendment gives the commission 45 days to draw the maps, hold public hearings, and come up with a proposal that works. Then the General Assembly would have 15 days to consider them and then finally vote up or down. The General Assembly cannot amend the plans. They can't redraw the lines, as Senator Watkins said has been done in the past. They either got to take it or leave it, either up or down. If they say no, then the commission has 14 days, 2 weeks to come up with an alternative map. And then the General Assembly has 7 days to vote. So that, so that's the time frame. And I don't know, we can go ahead and switch off of that. Would anybody want to venture a guess how long it would take the commission to do the job of, once they have the maps or have the data from the census, they have up to 45 days. Would it take that long, or do you think they could get it done sooner?
Let me quickly say, I can't comment on that. I don't have enough expertise to know how that might work, but I do want to point out that whether it's done by the commission or the legislature, you'd be dealing with the same disability here. So it's not a factor of the commission process bringing this about. It's something that the state would face in either case.
I think, and go ahead, Senator Watkins.
Well, I think you have to also take into consideration that even after you approve a map and vote on it, even if it's voted approved, it still has to go to the federal election folks to be approved through justice. And that's going to take time. I don't see how we get it done in the time frame that we have before us right now. And for the congressional and for the Senate, that's probably not, it's not as critical because they've got more time. But with the House of Delegates, it's right now. It's this year.
Bob, is anybody optimistic that we will see elections this fall or want to venture a guess on the likelihood we will see elections this fall in new House districts?
Well, I think the issue is really going to be what happens with the presentation of the census data. I think that if, unless there is some change, that it's going to make it more difficult to do so. So I just don't know for sure. And at some point, you really, when you're thinking about these primaries, there's going to be primary challenges in both parties. The legislators are going to want to know what districts they're in, and my sense is that if what the census is saying, that as you describe it, turns out to be the case, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to make this work in the way that people want it to work, which is that you want to be able to understand your district, understand who your representative is. And if it's absolutely rushed, that could really complicate, I think, the success of the whole initiative and endeavor.
Yeah, and so the question becomes, if the districts cannot be drawn in time, it would require the state Supreme Court to issue some sort of order, because it's a constitutional mandate that the districts the House elections have to take place.
Correct.
The history, of course, when Senator Watkins told us earlier that in 1981, the courts found that they kind of slapped the legislature on the wrist with this multi-member districts. And somebody asked a question about multi-member districts. And this was when, instead of having a district with one member, you would have a larger geographic area that would have two or three. I think, John, you ran the first time a 3-member district. And those were done, the critics of that said it was done for racial motivations to reduce the ability of Black voters to elect someone of their choice. So anyway, but when it happened in 1981, was the court said, slapped you on the wrist and said, as a result, you have to run in 82, 80, and 83. So you ran 3 years in a row. Is that necessarily going to be the case this time, or is it possible the court could say, for no reason, for your fault or your own, the commission couldn't get it done because of the lateness of the census data, go ahead and just run in the old districts and serve a full 2 years? Is that a possibility?
David, I'm no constitutional scholar on this by any stretch, but it would seem to me that the best alternative would be to run for a 1-year term in their existing district and get it done in the same timeline that the Senate and Congress would need their districts. And I would also throw out one other impediment that you run into. The House and Senate are very competitive at times with each other. And I can see a point where the Senate is going to say, we're not going to vote on a House redistricting plan if there's not a Senate one being voted on simultaneously.
Well, the good news is from that, the constitutional amendment requires the House and Senate plans to be in a single.
That's right.
This first map, this first sets of maps will be both the state House and the state Senate. They have an extra 15 days to come up with a separate bill on the congressional maps.
Mhm.
Well, I guess that will be a court decision. Well, we're about ready to wrap things up, obviously. Is there any last words from members of the panel here?
I think
Like Senator Watkins go first.
I think like Bobby has commented, we know it's not going to be perfect, but it's the beginning of an opportunity to provide fairness and in the elections in the future. And this is the first step.
Yeah, I would just second that, that this is a process. It will be better. I think we've shown over the past decades that this is a royal mess. I think the last bill we paid for court fights on redistricting at the state level was $4 million.
Huh.
And so there's no indication that that will change if we keep the same system. So I think this will be certainly an improvement. It's not going to be, magical greatness from the beginning, but it will be in the Virginia way, an evolution of perfecting over time, which is how all constitutional amendments work. They're not meant to be self-executing to perfection. It's meant that it will evolve with legislative wisdom and citizen impact and input over time. And I think that this will be, so I would just ask people to be patient with this process and let it evolve, knowing that we're in a better setting to move forward into the future.
I would basically say that I think the hope here is that we can remedy some of the more egregious manifestations of the process as it's been evidenced over the last 20 or 30 years. And I'm hopeful about that. But I would also say that both this process and the process in most states that try to do this turn out to be a bit of a contraption with these kind of odd rules, things that may not go that smoothly and the like. And if I have any concern, it's actually that we did write this in as an amendment to the Constitution, which I think, while we do have enabling legislation that can be used to tweak it, one of the challenges of having it in the Constitution is that it is very difficult to amend the Constitution as well. So, as I said, I'm hopeful that we'll remedy the more egregious manifestations. I'm a little concerned about how this operates, and every state has their own little contraption that tried to do this. And my sense is that this is going to have some bumps along the way. And I'm hoping that those bumps can be remedied relatively easily. But I'm sometimes a little worried about the fact that it is written into the Constitution.
Well, thank you. And I want to close up here by doing a couple of the nitty gritty points of the constitutional amendment that I think maybe have not gotten full, airing here. The first thing I want to do is correct. I believe I think it was Senator Watkins who mentioned the Department of Justice pre-clearance process, which is no longer required now of Virginia. Virginia is still subject to the Voting Rights Act and could be subject to a challenge, which ever since minority and majority districts have come into being in 1991, there's been a court challenge every single year on this issue, in which we didn't get a chance to talk much about today, and that is the requirement that Virginia absolutely has to take into account race when drawing these lines to make up for historic non-inclusion of Black people. And that, in fact, the courts are very clear that once you draw one of these minority and majority districts, there can be no what they call retrogression, which means you can't make them less likely to let minority groups elect a member of their community. What the problem with the Voting Rights Act is, that's not really clearly defined. And the courts have never really given clear judgment. So that's still very much an issue out there that has to be addressed, but it's not going to cause the time delay to take it to pre-clearance. And finally, I think it probably should be said, and we didn't talk a lot about the criteria, and that is one of the things that the legislation did this year was to delineate exactly what the commission has to take into account when drawing these districts. And there's three that I want to draw your attention to. One is compactness, and that is, and actually it calls on using modern mathematical measures to show how compact a district is. In other words, it doesn't, extend in this kind of snake way through the state. So there's going to be, there has to be a metric there that is measurable. The second one is communities of interest. And there's a lot of talk about this, about that neighborhoods that share social, cultural, and economic interest. But what's interesting about this criteria is it specifically does not define this by jurisdictional boundaries. So they're saying, for instance, there's some parts of, say, Eastern Richmond that have much more in common with neighboring Henrico County than other parts of Richmond. So, and how you define, though, a community of interest is there's no clear metric of what is a community of interest. And that will be something that's new and brought to the fore. And then finally, this is the interesting point that I think people have talked about, how this system will, it'll take into account partisanship, but one side is not going to be able to dominate the other as they have in the past. It says that the districts cannot unduly favor or disfavor any single party. And how they come up to measure that, what is the current state of Virginia? And if you think about 100 seats in the House, is that the current 55-45, or is it closer to 54-46? That's what the commission will have to figure out. But those are three new criterion, or that will have to be by law taken into account this year. So I want to thank the panel for their time, and particularly Bobby Vassar, who I think we called him, we were starting at 11. He probably got the call at 10:58. Great job for filling in for Senator Dance. And thank you so much. And thank you to our audience. We're gonna record this and put it online. If you didn't get enough, you can watch it again, or send your friends our way. All right, good afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.